Hello. Hi, my name is Kelsey Lopez. This is going to be a presentation on NeoBehaviorism. This is substituting a presentation I was supposed to do in class, but thankfully I'm going to be using this. I've never used this before, so I apologize in advance if I just have some technical difficulties. I'm also in my parents' house and it's currently raining, so if you see some rain or hear some rain, I apologize for that as well. But today we are going to be talking about neo-behaviorism, and we are going to be talking about how three crucial psychologists really just helped developed this part of psychology and how psychology has influenced us and how it's really influenced the psychological world when it comes to what we are studying and how we have gathered some of these famous thoughts. So, in just continuing with the next slide, let's see if we can do this properly. Okay, awesome. So, just a quick definition of exactly what neo-behaviorism is. It is a school of thought that possesses the study of learning and a focus on objective observational methods from the key to scientific psychology. It is basically bridging the gap between behaviorism and cognitive theories of learning. So, what we are seeing here is essentially the second phase of behaviorism. In the next slide, we're going to get into just a little bit of what behaviorism actually is. But just keep in mind that a lot of these psychologists have different viewpoints. They come from a lens of essentially behaviorism, or some of the ideas they didn't agree with behaviorism. So just kind of going into the little background, but the whole point and focus of this was observation. They realized that behaviorism didn't fully explain everything. They believed, in classical conditioning. They believed in how behavior continued, but they realized that just behaviorism on its own did not fully explain some of the things that were occurring. So, just give a brief background of what exactly neo-behaviorism is. It began in the 1930s and 40s, and is, like I said, it's the second phase of behaviorism. So, what exactly is behaviorism? It is the theory that human and animal behavior can be explained in terms of conditioning without appeals to thoughts or feelings, and that psychological disorders are best treated by altering behavior patterns. So, like Thorndike, Watson, and Pavlov, they believed that the study of learning and focus of observational methods were key to scientific psychology. So, when it came to the study of Pavlov, and of course the famous experiment when it came to the salivation of dogs, just by hearing the bell, that explained how you can learn and condition behavior, but it didn't explain behavior that was already happening. So, for example, gravity. How does the behavior of gravity happen? How do birds fly? You don't teach a bird to fly. So, neo-behaviorism kind of explained just a little bit more in depth. And these psychologists that we're going to go into, they all had a building block of how neo-behaviorism became to develop. So, neo-behaviorists, unlike their predecessors, were more self-consciously trying to formalize the laws of behavior. They realized, once again, there was a lot of behavior that was just not explained properly. So, they were mainly influenced by the Vienna cycle of logical positives, which they were led by Kornkamp, Northrop, Buell, who argue that meaningful statements about the world has to be cast as statements about physical observations. It wasn't not just more conditioning, but it's definitely more, what am I seeing? What exactly am I observing? And how do I put these physical observations into words, into laws of behavior? So anything else that was outside of the behavior was metaphysics or complete nonsense. It was not science, and therefore just had to be completely rejected. So they really believe that if something does not have a law, it's just complete nonsense. So knowledge, according to these logical positives, had to be built on an observational base. So this is really just so important for one to know, because we're looking at a lens of just observation, not of guessing, not of predicting, but what you see is what you get. So Some very, very positive terms and important terms that you need to know is number one, positivism. Positivism. I'm so sorry. So just the definition for that is a philosophy in which people believe the goal of knowledge is only to describe what people experience, and that science should only be studied in which what is measurable. So that would come with gravity, magnetism, and an atom, force, electrons, all of these things that one can begin to measure is positivism. But they were like, okay, what about other stuff? So this is when they developed the term of logical positivism, which are observational terms, are empirical and theoretical terms in which things are observed. So these theories were useful only if they were explained and what was observed. So these people, once again, we're just so focused on observation, and so they realize behaviorism just isn't enough. We need another form of behaviorism, which became to be the second phase, in which now is called NeoBehaviorism. So another really important terms that we need to realize is operational definition, which is defining the terms of a process needed to determine their existence. So anything that happens, it has to be explained, and you have to determine exactly what it is. And this is where the School of Psychology of Operationalism came to be. So this became the drive, the learning anxiety, intelligence. So obviously the inner drive that humans have, you can't see that, but we know that it's there. So operational definition, I'm so sorry, came to be in the sense of how do we measure this? How do we see it? What are we observing? Anxiety, you can't see anxiety, but you can experience it. You can put it into terms. So how exactly do we do that? And another important term is physicalism. Everything exists no more than its physical properties. Once again, what you see is what you get. So these psychologists, when they were just all really coming to be and saying, hey, what can we do? They really just wanted to discover and have more answers. So the first major one that I really, really want to focus on is Tolman. Just keep in mind, we're going to have Tolman and then another psychologist, and then we're going to have Skinner. Tolman and this other psychologist were in the same generation, and Skinner came after. So just focus, these two people have the same generation. They were back-to-back ideas. They grew up in the world of psychology. Once those people started to die down, that's when Skinner came, when he was evolving and became one of the great psychologists of all time. He really built off of that. So once again, just remember, it's kind of a building block. So one person said this, another person said this, and then one other person said this. So one of the main ones is Carl Tolman. A little bit of background about him. He studied at the University of Berkeley, and he was an animal psychologist. Who was retained from broad physiological perspective. So this is so very important, because when he was observing and he was studying animals, he wanted to know how the behavior of animals applied to a human being. So he really used animals and their behavior to try and gather more observations and answers on how humans react. He was very much influenced by Gestalt psychology, and he became the president of the APA Association in 1937. So he knew what he was talking about. He always knew how animals would react. So he just focused that his lens was definitely animals. So how it kind of an animal was could resemble how a human is. He also argued that much animal behavior have to have purpose. So as I said earlier of the analogy of the bird, he wanted to know how birds fly. How did that behavior came to be? How do we know how to fish to swim? So just focusing on that and that kind of lens is kind of where his question derived from, and that's how he wanted to just continue on more and more so. So one of the main things that he discovered and came up to be was molar behavior, which is behavior with a purpose. So something always had to have an intent. They always had to have a reason. He wanted to know what that reason is and how it applies. How can we put it into a law and how can we explain it? So this is where the term purpose of I'm so sorry purpose of behaviorism came to be. It combines the objective study of behavior while also considering the purpose or goal of the behavior. So not only do we observe the behavior of an animal, do we observe the behavior of a human, but what is the purpose or the goal of that? Why are they just trying to do that? And we see that with a bird. Why are they trying to fly? Why are they trying to build a nest? There's so many reasons of the why. And so that's when he came and he realized that drive determines the behavior. There is something inside a human, there's something inside an animal that tells them, hey, I need to do this. I have a reason, I have a purpose. And that drive came to be. You ask a college student, for example, which I thought was one of the greatest examples. We are in a junior and senior level course. By this time, we've almost been 3 to 4 years in college. And as each level continues on and grows, it gets harder and harder and harder. Usually by the end of the semester, everyone is very sleep deprived. Everyone has so much anxiety. They're just mentally and physically tired. But we know that comes usually at the end of each level of a course in psychology. If you are in psychology and you want to continue into grad school, you know that you're going to continue on. It's still going to be hard if you're trying to go to your doctoral and so on and so forth. But why exactly do humans try to put themselves through that? They know that it's causing them pain. They know that it's not the most pleasant feeling in the world. So what inside of them causes one to continue to do this? And this is where he comes, and he was the drive inside of us. So what is the goal? What is the purpose? Well, the goal for most of us is to have an education, to finish and have a bachelor's degree. The goal is to continue and be a master's and hopefully maybe one day have a practicum. So it's usually the cost outweighs the outcome. So he really wanted to discover and says that drives really determines the behavior. What are your intents? What are the actions that you're trying to do? So he really put that into perspective. So he also believed that purpose of behaviorism was believed in place learning. We've heard this over and over again. Learning also occurs when there are no, oh, I'm so sorry. So when he believed in place learning, if you were put into one specific situation, if you were to put in a similar situation, the outcome would fairly be the same, because what you learned in one situation, you are probably going to do it in another. And we see this as you grow up. You see this in what you experience. As a kid, your parents always said, don't touch the stove. But the kid was always going to do it and touch the stove until they learned. So once they touched the stove and it was hot, they're like, I'll never do it again. And if they were put in this similar situation, they probably most likely were not going to touch the stove again. So he really believed in also in place learning. But learning also occurs when there are no rewards, in the sense of, I'm so sorry. In the sense of sometimes there are just no rewards. Sometimes your parents will teach you or make you do something. Hey, go clean your room. Do you have a reward? No. Why do you have to do it? Because your parents told you so. So it's more of sometimes the drive is just, hey, I don't want to get yelled at. I don't want to be nagged, but I'm still going to do it even though I have no benefit from it. And then in this place, also, he developed the term of cognitive maps. And he really, really illustrated that in the sense of, if you were to ask an individual to go to the main office of their school, if someone were to ask them, hey, how do you get to the bathroom? They immediately will tell you, hey, if you go there and you take a right, if you see the stop sign, take a left. Where did that map come from? So he really came to terms and said, hey, people have cognitive maps in their brains. And you can go to your house, you know exactly where everything is placed, where you put that. So he was the one who discovered and put those into terms. So I have a quick video that kind of goes into more in depth of what he really believed. It talked about latent learning and how Tolman really just came into cognitive maps and intentional learning. So I really wanted to play this video and explain just a little bit more depth of what exactly he wanted and did. let's see if I can exit out of this video. So that video not only talked a little bit more about latent learning, but it also introduced one of Tolman's most famous experiments, and it involved lab rats. So just remember how he was an animal psychologist. He loved how animals' behavior were being portrayed. So in this scenario, he had two different groups. He had rats who were there for 11 days, and then the goal at the end, how to explain it? He had a one group where a rat was in a maze for 11 days, and the rat was able to examine the maze, see how things were going in and out. But at the end of the maze, at the end of the finish line, he had a reinforcer, which was food. He also had another group with rats in which they were there as well for 11 days, and but they did not have a reinforcer, so they did not have any food. When it came down to it, he wanted to know who had the best time, and both rats completed the maze in the exact same amount of time. So that's where he came and developed latent learning. This is really when he said, hey, there doesn't always have to be a reward. There doesn't have to be a reinforcer to get what you want, to know a behavior. So Tolman is definitely most known for his famous experiments with rats, and that's how that term became to be. Okay. Uh-oh. Huh. Let's see. Okay. So this also where it came with cognitive maps. This study also developed latent learning cognitive maps, and here is just another video of how he really outlined that experiment. So this person is just going to be talking a little bit about where the food maybe could have been a factor, how the food, what kind of food, all those things and questions that could have been factors, and why the rats finished at the exact same amount of time. Just this video goes into a little bit in depth for that. Mhm. So that video really just illustrated how different response learning is, how place learning is, how us as individuals can be similar just in the sense of, hey, how we respond is different, how we learn in a place setting is different. So it was really, really, really interesting how he highlighted it and how the rats had to respond to different scenarios. Okay, so also Tolman, when he was doing that experiment, he realized that there are some things that really causes behavior, and that includes environmental stimuli, heredity, previous training, psychological drives, and age. So obviously, environmental stimuli, you might not perform better, you might not learn better in an area where you're not comfortable. Heredity, if your parents kind of like evolution, survival of the fittest. If you are tall, you might be good at some sports versus someone who is short, brown eyes, white hair, blonde skin, any previous training when it comes to if you're going to be, for example, of a sport, you can be better whether you're playing a sport, someone who's done it since they were very little compared to your chances are going to be you're probably not going to be as good as someone well, they're going to be better than someone who hadn't had previous training. Psychological drives, that includes sex, that includes anxiety, intelligence, and then age. You're not going to compare someone who's 20 years old to someone who is 60 years old. You have different drives, you're doing different points in life. So these are just some of the causes of behavior that Tolman came to come down. So in reality, he really just broke it down into three steps. So you have your independent variables, which are your environmental states, which then affect the intervening variables, which are your theoretical variables, and then dependent variables come into place, and that's when the behavior comes. So here, what would be a good example? So in the sense of a student, you might be learning in school, but you have an intervening variable, which can be test anxiety, and then the behavior will be he didn't do well on a test. So how all of these things just really come together and actually be some of the causes of how behavior can come out. Okay, so that was Tolman's building block on the site of NeoBehaviorism. Another one who's a really, really major influence is Clark Leonard Hall. He had a functionalist perspective in the sense that he wants to explain adaptive behavior. How does one situation adapt to another? How did this behavior adapt to some of the environments and to the stimuli? Just how does it all work well-rounded? And he also came up with the term of hypothetical deductive, which starts with a general theory of all possible factors that might affect an outcome in forming a hypothesis. Deductions are then made from the hypothesis to predict what might happen in an experiment. And that's kind of what we've all been taught throughout our lifetime with the scientific method. You start with a general what could go wrong, everything that you can possibly finally establish what could go right. You do that, you see if it works out, and then you have your solution. So Hall was really one of the main founders of that, and he became a building block on how many other psychologists and scientists really came to build on that. So in studying how adaptive behavior came to be, he realized that there were intervening variables, which were unobserved and interfered factors within an organism that are actual determinants of behavior. I think we have all realized with personal experience that, yeah, some things inside of us cause and react and determines how we behave. If you are doing a test, anxiety, bad outcome, that came into play. If you're angry and you're mad at your parents, you're probably going to be yelling at them. Those are the types of behavior and interfering variables that he was talking about. So they were unobservable events that take place in the organism, which is the mentalistic event. So something that's happening in here, something that's happening in here, all of these things that are just really coming together and how one really reacts in a behavior that influence how a stimulus results in a particular response. So Hall was really focused on that. He also really came up with reinforcement. He believed in a biological need. There is no behavior without a drive. There's always has to be a purpose, a reason why someone does something. And this is where he came to be kind of like the intensity of the drive. So you have drive reduction, which is your motivation theory, that all organisms have biological needs that must be met if they are to survive in internal calmness. And then he separated these two types of drives into your primary drive and your secondary drive. Primary drive are the things that we essentially need for survival. This would be your food, this would be your sleep, this would be affection. For some people, sex is absolutely necessary. That works, and you see that in a marriage. Obviously, we need food and sleep to survive. Your secondary drive would be money, pleasure, and your social approval. Just keep in mind that your primary drives need to be met first in order for your secondary drives to start taking in. You start to see people who have everything. You might say, hey, they might be financially comfort. That's when their secondary drives come in and they're like, but I want more money. I want more pleasure. I want more social approval. So just keep in mind, primary always comes first, secondary comes in second. So he viewed and did some experiments on animals as well, and what he came up with is that we get a response from the animal depending on how strong the drive is. So the need of the drive, how essential do I need that drive or that specific thing to happen? And in response to that, how well is the response? So that's when the habit strength comes in. And a habit strength is said to increase. So this is where the development of habits come into place. Me, I am a nail biter. So my need inside of me would be to calm myself down. And that is the sense of I get very anxious. I need something to calm me down. That calms me down, and I could be down to the nub and I'm still biting. Because over time, my response of calmness has increased when I bite my nails, the strength of the habit has increased. So if I were to ever break that habit, I would need to replace that with something that helps me calm even more than the nail biting. So this is just keep in mind, the stronger the reaction, the stronger the habit could be. So another term would be your reaction potential, which is the function of both the amount of drive and the number of times the response has been reinforced. So learning was continuous. You say practice makes perfect. If you want a goal and you have a purpose, hey, the more times I get that successful desire behavior that I want, the more times it comes, the more strengthened it would be. Hence, learning is continuing. So you see how Tolman came, and then this person came, and then how we're building the block of NeoBehaviorism. So I also have another video for you, which is your drive reduction theory. Kind of explains how drives are formed, how it increases, how it decreases, and what his theory really is, and kind of goes more into depth of how it is explained. Mhm. I love that video. Really just explained, how the drive reduction theory works. Okay, let's see. Oh, no, we're not trying to do that. Okay. So Hall continued and came up with the law of primary reinforcement. So you have your stimulus response, you have a reduction, and then the probability of that behavior to occur increases. So as we see that in the previous video, how that came to be. So learning cannot take place in the absence of a reinforcement. That was one of the biggest things. So with Tolman, he said that learning can occur without a reinforcement. He says that cannot happen. You have to have a reinforcement, which is necessary to bring out the reduction of the drive. So if you do not have the motivation to do it, you just won't do it. When talking about Toldman, and I said that the cleaning the room, hey, there's no reward, but you will still clean your room. Hall could argue that the nagging was the reinforcement. So you might not specifically have a reward in the sense of I'm going to get something good out of it, but reducing the chances of nagging, that would be your internal reward. Hey, I'll clean my room if it means that my mom will not bug me anymore. So that was just some of the things that they were a little bit different in seeing eye to eye on this. Soon enough, as he published this and came out with the science, within 10 years, 40% of experiments involved this theory, which increased to 70% when fields of learning and motivation were continued. Hall really had a huge impact when it came to how experiments came to be, how motivation was being discovered. So Hall was definitely a huge part in the development of neo-behaviorism, and how these so many psychologists from then on out were seeing things and seeing these types of experiments. So just remember, Tolman and Hall were in the same generation, and then Skinner came after it. So although Hall had a really great success and really influenced so many psychologists, with over time, it did start to die out. As more things were being developed, they were like, maybe it's not exactly the way that they pictured it. So it died down, but Skinner came and he realized, hey, Hall really might be into something, but he may not be completely correct. So let's see what I can add and what's my perspective on this. So he really believed that all mental events are simple verbal labels given to certain bodily responses. And this includes the consciousness, the mind, the mental life, the part of the observer's mind. I mean, come on, we're talking about Skinner here. So he really believed that it was just mental events that really wanted to just give us that drive. So he completely rejected Hall's theory. He said, hey, we don't have drives, we just have mental events. We want to be in a specific situation. This is my take on it. So he really focused on observable behavior only. This is really how NeoBehaviorism came to be, and really wanted to focus on observations. What do you see? What are you getting? So he comes up with the term functional analysis, which is the cause and effect relationship between environmental factors and behavior. How are my surroundings, if I was to use myself as an example, affecting how I'm being caused? So I can be, for example, my brother in the other room, he's listening to music, I can be talking just a little bit louder. That's my behavior of speaking a little bit louder. This is where we discover operant conditioning, the nature of reinforcement, the importance of the environment. We have seen that environment causes a huge amount of influence in people and how they react. So he really comes and just kind of puts labels and defines everything. So he really saw life as a product of past reinforcements. You study your responses with all your life and your experience. This is how it came to be. So he described rather than explained the behavior. And this came with observable behavior. So this came with one of the most famous experiments that Skinner once developed. He did the rat experiment. We're going to just be watching 2 videos. The first video is just explaining what the rat experiment is, what he was doing, specifically what he was thinking, and then the Skinner rat box video, which is the second video. This is putting that experiment into play. So we will see live in action what he was seeing back then, and how and why he thought how behavior was just simply observable. So that was that kind of. Humans are very exploratory. We're very curious. So with the example of the kid in the stove, I want to experience why a stove is hot. So this is just a video of how it really looks in real life. We're not going to be watching the whole thing, just a little bit of what's going on. So you have the rat, you have the Skinner box. You see that he's just eating, he's kind of just looking a little bit. Let's see what he does. See, he wants food, but no food is coming out. Hey, he pulls the lever, food comes out. So no one is teaching him to do this. He is purposely doing it on his own. So that's why Skinner rejected Hall and was saying, hey, I think it's just a matter of your environment. If this happens, then this is a response you're going to get. If I do this, then this can happen. So it was just more environmental stimuli. There he is again. The rat's just enjoying his food. He wants the food again, pulls the lever, and then he finally gets to see, if I pull the lever, then I will be getting the food. Like I said, we're not going to be watching this whole video. It's just at the end of the day, around pulling a lever. So that just really, really explained how that came to be. Oh, skip. Okay. And this is just a chart that really breaks down how reinforcement you have. So you have reinforcement and then you have punishment. So with positive reinforcement, a reinforcement increases the frequency of behavior. So reinforcement is always going to increase behavior. So whether you have positive or negative, you're always going to get a desired outcome. Punishment decreases the behavior, you're always going to get the less desired outcome. So with you have positive, you will get more the desire that you have. With negative, it removes the outcome. So in the sense of me cleaning my room, hey, if I want to have a clean room and that is my desire, I'm going to clean my room. Hence, I will continue to do it more often because that is my positive reinforcement. Because I'm happy with the clean room, I'm going to continue to do that. So the reinforcement of having a clean room continues to go on. Now, a negative reinforcement would be, hey, I don't want to have a clean room, but my mom wants me to have a clean room. The nagging would be the reinforcement, but it would increase the chances of you continuing to clean your room. I don't know. Oh my gosh. Oh, whew. Oh my goodness, I was so scared for a second. My computer went blank and I thought I was going to have to start all over. Okay, we are going to go back. Woo! Totally scared for a second. Okay, so the nagging continues to go on. I get the mother gets the desired outcome, but the negative reinforcement of the nagging is removed to get the desired outcome. The punishment would be, for example, and it decreases the frequency. If I were a parent and I would want my kid to stop doing a specific behavior, then I am going to reward him to lessen the behavior. So for example, I have a kid and I say, hey, I don't like that you yell at me. I don't like that you backtalk me. I am going to give you a chocolate for you not to backtalk me, but for actually to learn how to communicate with me. So that would be the positive punishment. It's still a punishment because it decreases the behavior of the yelling. The negative punishment would be, hey, I want you're behaving bad. I'm going to, spank you. I'm going to reward, or I'm going to take away, your PS5 now that the new PS5 is coming out. That would be the negative punishment. The person is getting the negative punishment, and it could be either positive or negative. So I hope I explained that really well. So that one to continue to move on. Okay. So these terms came. You have your out of this experiment, he really came and noticed that you get reinforcement schedules, which are conditions involving various rates and times of reinforcement. So, what would be a really good example? Eating wise, your reinforcement is you're hungry. You're not always going to be hungry. So if you're reinforced in the morning, hey, this is time for breakfast. You're reinforced when you're getting hungry again by lunchtime. So the action and the behavior of getting food increases at different rates and at different times. And this also, the law of acquisition came with the strength of an operant behavior is increased when it is followed by the presentation of reinforcing stimulus. So the behavior is increased when you have the reinforcing stimulus. So the more you do it, the more the response and the behavior happens, the stronger it will be. Which, if you think about it, is also how Hall came with the habit, how Tolman came with the habit. So you also have your behavior modification, the use of positive reinforcement to control or modify the behavior of individuals and groups. So the more you add, the more the behavior or the desired behavior that you have. So, all of these people, you have Tolman, you have Hull, you have Skinner, they all came together and was like, hey, this is how we explained behavior more into depth. You have your drives, you have your habits, you have all these different lenses. But there's always a but in psychology, is that these are just theories. These are just potential, really good educated guesses. So Guthrie, he really, really was skeptical of all of this. He said, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. And he really is really one of my favorite guys because everything I just said, he just broke it down in one swoop. So, just a quick background of him. He was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he graduated from the University of Nebraska with a bachelor's degree in arts and mathematics. He published the really famous book of Psychology of Learning, and he felt there were just simply too many rules for learning. This is just so complicated. What do you mean there's a reinforcer and there's a drive? No. This all can't be true. So, what he really focused on was the law of learning and the law of continuity. If you did something in a given situation, the next time you are in the situation, you will tend to do the same thing. It was like, we don't need a reinforcer. If you just did it one time, it's going to happen again. So, this is where he really believed in one trial learning. You do something one time, that's it. It's a full association of strength on the first pairing with a response. You can argue the same thing with a kid touching the stove. I will never touch the stove if it's hot. Why? Because the consequence was it hurt. Plain and simple. So he also came with the nature of reinforcement. Reinforcers work because they prevent others' behaviors from becoming associated with that stimulus. So reinforcement prevents unlearning. So it's they reinforce because they prevent other things from happening. So I'll never learn how to be a professional basketball player just because I'm not associated with the stimulus of wanting to become a basketball player. So this is, I have a video here real quick, really just a 1 minute video that describes how one trial learning is. And it's just about how this is the Dr. Phil show. They have a couple and how their granddaughter is exposed to her parents, how they're always drunk, and why they're continuing to do that. You would think you would learn one trial learning, but you don't. So I just wanted to play this one real quick. One trial learning, and that's in positive situations or in negative situations. Okay, let's see what else. We're almost done. Okay, so in order to also break down some of the other major ideals that they had, he really just focused on he compared behavior kind of to just simple building blocks. You have one thing, it reacts to another, which reacts to another, and it's just kind of building off from that. So he argued that these behaviors are just acts and movements. Movements are just muscle contractions. If I move, that's it. There's nothing inside of me telling me, hey, I need you to move like this. So he said movements are just muscle contractions, and acts are made up of large number of movements. So if I start dancing, I am moving a lot, I'm snapping, I'm moving my head, all of these things, all of this is learning that these other psychologists were saying. They're just like, no. These are just a bunch of acts together, and you're creating acts are just large amounts of movements together. A skill is made up of many acts. The more times I do it, the better I get. Hence, I have a skill. So he really just broke it down, and you have a movement, then you have an act, and then you have a skill. I was just like, he might be onto something. So learning actually is just a skill that involves learning thousands of associations between specific stimuli and movements, which practice allows more and more specific associations to be made. So for example, I can move my eyebrows up and down, but with time and practice and other associations, I can move just one eyebrow, which I'm very proud of, by the way. So these are just things that I didn't have to learn, but more practice, make more associations. So another additional responses that he really had to break down, some of the other theories that these developers were saying is just simply forgetting, which occurs by causing an alternative response to happen in the presence of the stimuli. For example, the new stimuli will bring out the new response. All forgetting must involve new learning. And it makes sense. If you are sitting in a classroom, I have no idea what I learned in the third grade because I got reinforced with new types of math. Instead of just adding 4 plus 4, I got involved with trigonometry. I had, what is the area of a triangle? All of these things kind of just made me forget some of the things that I learned in the past. So new responses were being formed. He also said breaking habits. A habit is associated with large amounts of stimuli. So find the cues that initiate the bad habit, practice another response in the presence of those cues. So, continuing the example of me biting my nails, if I were to find something else that replaces how I feel calm, then I can break a habit. Other than that, if you're just continuing that same stimulus, you're just going to continue to do that bad habit. So if you want to break a habit, find something else that will replace your response. This also worked with punishments. Works not because of pain, but because it changes the individual's response. So a person disobeys their parents, they get grounded, they won't do it again, not because it hurt them, but because, hey, I learned a different response. Mom got mad this time. She didn't just let me pass by with the behavior that I was doing. And the drives inside of us, he answered and responded to, it just maintains stimuli. So whatever desires we have, we want to continue it and create and just kind of have a homeostasis and just continue what we want to continue. We want to reverse ourselves back to the normality that we had. So that's all I have for you today. So this really just breaks down what NeoBehaviorism is. You have Tolman, you have Hull, you have Skinner. At the end of the day, you had your tea, wanting to break down. So it really just depends, what is your lens? How do you see NeoBehaviorism? How do you see behaviorism in general? So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Sabel, for letting me do this online, and I hope you really do feel better. So praying for you, and thank you just so much for spending the time with me today. Awesome. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.